Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everything EV podcast, the podcast that is dedicated to everything electric. I'm your host, Charlie Atkinson, and in these episodes we'll be discussing everything to do with electric travel. So whether it be cars, bikes, boats or planes, we'll have it covered. We'll also have regular guests from within the industry, as well as other features such as electric car reviews, electric motorsport coverage, and much more along the way. Be sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from to receive every episode as soon as it's released, and please do go back and check out all our other episodes too. For this episode, we're focusing on BP Pulse, one of the largest electric vehicle charging networks in the UK. Here to talk about the organisation and its work in electrification is Tom Callow. Tom has been involved with BP for more than 4 years and is now Head of Insight and External Affairs, with a focus on electric vehicles and electric charging. Tom, welcome to the podcast. Before we get into it, could you just introduce yourself and tell everyone what it is you do?
Hi, Charlie. So I'm Tom Callow, Head of Insight and External Affairs for BP Pulse in the UK. So I'm primarily engaged with a lot of our external stakeholders, so the likes of government departments, OZEV, Department of Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy, for example. I work with a lot of our external customer partners as well, so often speaking with our representatives from car manufacturers. And also looking at really at the wider market. So looking at the EV market, which, as you know, as EV Powered knows, is exploding in the UK. So looking at the business, our internal data and surfacing insights from that, helping us to make decisions about how to move forward, but also taking insights from the external market as well. So what's the market doing, what are the competitors doing, and so on, and looking at where things are going in the market.
So when did BP's journey into electrification and electric vehicle charging begin?
So BP acquired ChargeMaster in the summer of 2018. I think it's fair to say BP was looking very seriously at electrification quite a long time before that. So we were certainly on the radar. ChargeMaster, which is the business I came from, was certainly on the radar of BP, and I'm sure many others way before the summer of 2018. And it obviously formulated an electric vehicle strategy and a strategy around providing electrification services. And it's really tied into BP's commitment to become a net zero business and help its customers to get to net zero as well. So it's obviously undergoing this transformation that Bernard Looney announced last February from an international oil company, an IOC, to an integrated energy company, an IEC. And obviously a very logical step in that is to deliver electrification through mobility and convenience services, because this is the way that a lot of vehicles, not necessarily all vehicles, but a lot of vehicles are going to be powered in the future. So going from the form of powered propulsion today to electrification, just a very natural step. So I think actually at the time that BP acquired ChargeMaster, I said to someone the other day, that I think there was this almost an immediate kind of shock and surprise, the very second they heard about it, and then almost immediately there was actually this period of, oh, actually that's very obvious, that's very natural. So there was almost this, wow, this is amazing and really unexpected, and then people kind of let it sink in and thought, actually, this is really logical. So it's yes, it's kind of a big surprise, but it's a hugely logical move and a hugely smart move for BP. So I think people have realised that to get the transition underway at pace, companies like BP needed to step into it. So it's great to see the changes we're seeing now in the market.
I think it's really interesting that you refer to BP as an international energy company now, when many would still consider it an international oil company. So with all that investment that's gone into electric vehicle charging, would you say that the focus of the company has shifted onto electrification rather than just petrol and diesel now?
I think the focus is on energy, right? So BP publishes a report every year called the Energy Outlook. Mm-hmm. It's coordinated by a fantastic economist called Spencer Dale and his team, and it's really about where is the global demand for energy? Who needs it? Where do they need it? How do they need it? And looking at the trends about how it's going to change in the future. So what is clear is that there are going to be millions in the UK, I'm just talking about the UK now, millions and millions of electric cars by 2030. We're projecting perhaps up to 12 million electric cars on the road by 2030. But what is equally clear is therefore that there will be millions and millions of petrol and diesel cars on the road. We know the car park in the UK is about 35 million. So you're going to have that mix of both EV and ICE for some time. You're not going to get to a point of 100% of vehicles being EV for some time, if ever. I personally believe there'll be classic cars and other vehicles on the road that are ICE powered for decades to come, possibly forever. but they won't be driven, as much as perhaps the sort of mass market vehicles are today. So I'm not sure it's necessarily a sort of a direct substitution in terms of it's not, a lack of focus on one area and a greater focus on the other. It's more about this transition from how vehicles are powered and moved around, and making sure that the energy is there to do that. So there's clearly huge demand now. So there's still huge demand for oil and gas. Whether people like it or not, it's the way that a lot of economic activity is delivered today is through oil and gas. So if you turned off the taps, I suspect that things would get pretty dicey quite quickly. If people couldn't get access to those products, you'd stop getting people being driven to hospital because ambulances couldn't get around on diesel as they do today. Fire engines couldn't get out to put out fires. Hot shops would run out of food very quickly. So you'd see the kind of the collapse of society pretty quickly, unfortunately, if you turn these products away straight away. So it's this transition, I think, that's the important thing from one form of energy to another. That's really what this whole story is about.
Just to focus on that word transition, obviously you've been at BP for a number of years now. In that time, how have you seen the EV space grow, and what have been some of the biggest changes you've witnessed firsthand to the industry?
I think the biggest thing is that the market is now much more investable. Mm-hmm. I think if you rewind, perhaps not quite 10 years, but the sort of eight-year period maybe, there was still quite a lot of skepticism around, are electric vehicles really going to take off, in inverted commas? Are they going to be a big thing? Are they going to be a big feature of the market? A hydrogen car is going to come along and steal their thunder and become the mass market solution quicker, for example. And there were genuinely conversations in sort of the middle part of the 2010s, 2014, that alluded to that. Is this market really going to kind of go from a few thousand vehicles a year to hundreds of thousands of vehicles a year to millions of vehicles a year? So the biggest change is how sort of definitive the market now is, how certain it is. And I think that really corresponds to the certainty around the kind of this transition point, right? The net zero point, which is, and I made this point recently in another podcast, is that I see a huge amount of consensus around the destination. There aren't many businesses of any size, individuals out there that you'd speak to who would suggest that we shouldn't be working towards net zero, or that the idea of decarbonisation is somehow bad. I think there's an agreement on what we need to get to, how and the end game. We need to decarbonise rapidly. We obviously need to get to net zero. The debates that are happening now and the discussions are really about the speed that we get there and the methods by which we get there. So what technologies do we use? How quickly can we deploy them? How quickly can they scale up, and so on? So in the same way that there's that consensus around the destination of where we need to get to, but the debate is around the how, I think with the market, we now have this confidence in the market that we are going to the mass adoption of EVs, and thus in our world, in EV infrastructure, there is a huge amount of confidence and certainty in investing and deploying that infrastructure, because ultimately you know that it's going to be needed, you know that it's going to be used. So this is then about how do you deploy it, where do you deploy it, how quickly, do you deploy 20 chargers at once in an area, do you deploy 2, and so on. So I think that the biggest change is that investability and the confidence that people have in this growing market. So BP obviously acquired ChargeMaster. You've seen other major acquisitions, one recently this morning, and more and more capital coming into this market to really move things on. And that gives me huge confidence, and it should give hopefully drivers confidence as well, because one thing we do see is there's a slight tendency towards pessimism when it comes to electric vehicles, particularly infrastructure. I often sense that there is this suspicion that it won't happen. There is this underlying suspicion that for some reason that nobody can quite explain to me, electric vehicle infrastructure simply won't be there, or there won't be enough of it, or it won't happen quickly enough. And I don't know why there's that suspicion, because this is as I say, a highly investable market. There's lots of capital going into it. I think there were probably some fairly tales of woe from early adopters who had to go through that pain of very few charging points, and the ones that were there weren't always necessarily reliable, to a much better situation today, much higher level of reliability, availability and accessibility to chargers. So I think it's about giving people that confidence that the infrastructure will be there, is indeed there today, but will increasingly be there from now until 2030 and beyond. And actually, if you want to choose an electric car, if you want to switch to an electric car now, you should have the confidence to do so.
You just touched on there some of the investment that BP has made into EV charging. Could you walk us through some of the key moves the company has made, and just off the back of that subject of criticism and skepticism, how has that investment helped answer some of those critics of electric vehicles and electric charging?
I mean, a couple of great ones that are fairly recent is one. Well, I guess there's a couple in the same sort of space, but one is around an agreement that we signed with a company called FreeWire Technologies. They're based in San Francisco. They make a sort of battery integrated charger. It's called a boost charger. Now, the really cool thing about that is that it allows you to deliver ultra fast charging speeds without necessarily needing the same level of sort of grid capacity, grid connection that you would typically need for a non-battery integrated charger. So where people are suggesting, for example, that you might only see rapid ultra fast charging in cities and towns, and that rural areas are going to be left out, or areas where grid capacity is poor are going to be left out, solutions that we are bringing to market, like bringing to the UK, like the FreeWire charger, are one of the ways that we can help address those kind of concerns and say, look, we are finding products, we're finding methods and technologies that will help us address those areas that people are worried about. Will there be charging in rural areas? Will I be able to charge at those kind of speeds all over the country, not just in the wealthy urban areas, whatever? So I think the point around sort of where charging can be will be solved quite quickly. I think in terms of the kind of coverage point and this idea of the mass market and mass adoption in type infrastructure, we announced that we're starting to develop ultra fast charging hubs, so dedicated EV hubs. So we're not talking, as a complementary form of infrastructure to the forecourt rollout we're doing. So obviously, BP has about 1,200 branded forecourts across the UK. It owns about a third of those. They are the primary target for deploying ultra fast charging for kind of that local need, where the forecourt is your local mobility hub, if you like. But then obviously on other routes, in other areas to support other needs and other use cases, we're developing the ultra fast charging hubs that are new sites. So these aren't us putting chargers on a forecourt; these are us building a dedicated facility that EV drivers will be able to go and use. There'll be canopies, there'll be potentially driver lounge, toilets, Wi-Fi, refreshments, food and drink, etc. And you'll be able to obviously pull up, get charging speeds of up to 300 kilowatt while you're having a quick coffee for 10 minutes or what have you. So those kind of types of infrastructure are what you'll see much more of in the years to come. And we had to start somewhere as an industry, so I don't just mean us, but other players had to start somewhere. So yes, you've seen us go through that phase of deploying single or double kind of installations of rapid chargers in certain areas, because bluntly that's what the market demanded at that point. There wasn't the utilization there to support someone coming and installing a hub of 30 rapid chargers 5 years ago. There just wasn't the use case for it. So I think now you're going to start seeing that as we've got this huge market growth of vehicles. We've seen registrations already hit 100,000 this year alone. So you are confident as an infrastructure operator that you're going to see that level of utilization. You're confident in the investment case. So that's what's driving this deployment now of this larger forms of infrastructure scale out. So I think those are just two examples of the kind of investments or the kind of moves we're making, and others are making the same, right? And there's a point here to be made that it's a competitive market in the UK. There's lots of investment, lots of players. We are we're happy to be playing a leading role in the market, but we are very respectful of the fact that everyone's driving at the same goal here, and drivers are actually going to see huge growth in infrastructure over the next few years.
Obviously, there are other competitors out there, and Shell, for example, has announced plans for a series of fast charging hubs recently, but also there are a lot of companies similar to BP that have yet to move into that space. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on what might be stopping them from moving into EV charging.
I think you'll see much more investment across the board in EV charging for sure. Clearly, one of the things that the sort of ChargeMaster business brought to BP was a knowledge of the market, and a huge amount of data as well. And that's really important in understanding, where charging is working well, where the demand hotspots are, and so on. Is the data that actually helps you make those decisions. So BP brings a wealth of data to the table in terms of knowing where existing traffic flows are, where are the busiest forecourts, where are the busiest sort of areas today for vehicles moving around. We've got a database of over 40 million or so charging sessions, various types, various different methods of charging that we can obviously tap into as well and overlay that and say, well, where are the hotspots for charging today? Do they overlay with where we have forecourt assets? Can we match those two things together? So being able to actually look at the data and analyze and make decisions based on that actionable insight is really key. But I think, as I say, I'm very confident, very optimistic about the future in terms of the pace that we will see. Only this morning there was an announcement from a company about an acquisition in this space, and I saw some of the comments from electric vehicle drivers saying, "Wow, it just feels like every day or every week I'm waking up to big news about infrastructure in the UK," and that for me is a great indicator that people are seeing this activity, rather than this pessimistic noise of well, we'll never have enough. It's always going to be very difficult to drive an EV in the UK when patently isn't today. And I think this is what we need to hear more of, and that's what people will hear more of over the coming kind of months and years. Is good news, more investment, more infrastructure, and hopefully that will just continue to grow the confidence and the reassurance that actually, the transition will be much easier probably than some of the skeptics suggest at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there's still this battle between the so-called skeptics and pessimists and those that are well on board with electric vehicles. As someone who works in the industry and lives and breathes electric vehicles, do you get frustrated when you're faced with those skeptics, or do you see it as more of a, we need to communicate what we're doing better and make people more aware of the infrastructure that's available and the infrastructure that's going to come?
I mean, I think if there's someone, I'd rather change a mind than sort of have a pointless argument. So I think a lot of this comes down to education, and a lot of it is simply around a lack of awareness and a lack of education around the current situation, but also the future. So a lot of the myths that you see perpetuated, a lot of the sort of arguments you see are completely invalid, but the person making them thinks they're valid because they don't have the evidence to sort of counter it. Mm-hmm. And there's obviously ones that are perhaps slightly more sort of strained, but there are genuine. We have an electric vehicle experience centre in Milton Keynes that we operate on behalf of Milton Keynes Council, and the team there, a great team of EV gurus. If any of the listeners are based in Milton Keynes and want to go for a test drive there, it's a great facility, and they've done a survey of their visitors who are all these people are visiting electric vehicle experience centre. They're interested in electric cars, and over a third of the people that visited had no idea you could rapid charge an electric car. They did a survey recently, so over a third had no idea you could charge an electric car in less than an hour. They all thought it would take hours. That 35% of people all thought it must take hours. So you've got a third of people of engaged consumers thinking that it's going to take them hours to charge an electric car, hopefully being delighted to learn that it doesn't, and they can charge in half an hour or 20 minutes or what have you, to 80%. So I think you've got this huge job of education that he's doing, and we have a job to do in that as BP and BP Pulse. And you've got a job to do as EV Powered, and the car manufacturers have got a job to do, and everyone else has as well, and government. And we've all got to pull together to make sure that education is there and the right message is getting across. So I don't think there's many people who are sort of willingly anti-electric vehicle just for the sake of it. I just think that they haven't been told why the problems they think are there aren't problems. And it's everything from thinking you can't drive through a car wash to thinking that batteries are all going to end up on a scrap heap at the end of their lives, and actually they'll be recycled instead. So it's all of those things. But I think education is the key. And while it frustrates me a little bit, I'm hopefully very quick to actually try to convince that person that actually that they have reason to be confident as opposed to be skeptical about the EV transition.
Just on that subject of education, you mentioned that part of the responsibility lies with government. As one of the largest electric vehicle charging networks in the UK, has BP Pulse interacted with government in any way in terms of electric vehicle charging?
We've very strong relationship with government, relevant departments. We've given evidence at select committee inquiries in the past, and obviously given our views as a business to where we see this transition happening. But I think that I was involved in Chargemaster when the first sort of office for low emission vehicles then was set up, OLEV, and now it's OZEV. You've already seen that transition from low emission to zero emission, and I think that in itself was a great idea to set up this kind of cross functional department that actually would help guide sort of policy and activity in this area as opposed to having it in silos in different departments. That was a great idea. There's now a huge team in OZEV. I mean, I remember there being maybe half a dozen people, and now I lose track of how many people now work there. It's a great sort of cross-functional area. And I think that a lot of the policy you're seeing and the sort of fiscal policy as well is actually making sense. So if you think about the plug-in car grant, for example, the recent cut in the plug-in car grant for new vehicles, regardless of whether you disagree or agree with it, one of the observations that I have is that what you saw immediately after the announcement that the grant was being kind of reduced in terms of the price cap was you saw several manufacturers reduce the price of their cars. Now that is something that people want to see happen. We know that a lot of people think it's infrastructure, but the recurrent point around EV adoption and the barriers to it, or if there are any, is that the vehicles are still too expensive for all the consumers. So being able to reduce the price is really important. If you can pull a lever as government and get that change, get to reduce the price of the vehicles, surely that's a good thing. So actually, I think there's I'm sure government gets a bashing in some areas, but actually I think we've got a good set of policies in the UK at the moment. There's as I say, reasons to be optimistic, reasons to be cheerful. There are various things that we talk to government about and things that I think could be improved or changed. But I think in the round, we've got a very supportive landscape in the UK for this transition, and we've been fortunate about the way things have evolved, I think, so far.
Okay, great. And now, just finally, we've spoken about the current state of the industry and the moves that will be made in terms of electric vehicles and electric charging. But could you just try and paint a picture of what you think the EV space will look like in the next 5 years or so?
Great question. I think one of the big changes people will see is in the vehicle themselves. So I think there'll be a few key features of the vehicles that people may not expect today, and I think they'll see in 5 years. And one is obviously the model mix. We know there's about 40 or 50 electric vehicles you can buy today. That's about 10% of the total number of models available. So there's well over 350 petrol and diesel cars you can choose from, and there's about 40 or 50 different electric models. So we know there's an issue in choice of vehicle type. If you need an electric estate car or a 7-seater, your choices are pretty limited. I think there'll also be a quite a radical shift in technology, and one of the key things will be speed of charge, so the ability for vehicles to charge very quickly. As I say, this 35% of people that didn't think they could charge in anything less than an hour, but actually you'll be charging a lot quicker than that in 5 years' time in the latest electric cars on the market. So you'll see mainstream models with 200 plus kilowatt charging. You've already seen that from Hyundai and Kia with vehicles coming out this year that are capable of those really ultra fast speeds, and charging hundreds of miles of range in a matter of minutes. I think in terms of the other aspects, I think the used market will be much more buoyant. So you've seen a huge adoption of electric vehicles through fleets or businesses in the last 12 months or so, and you'll see that this year, next year as well. So lots of vehicles coming through salary sacrifice schemes, lots of vehicles being adopted into corporate fleets. Those vehicles, are big chunky volumes of vehicles that will go into the used market in a few years' time and help again to push pressure on prices. As supply creeps up, prices will lower, and you'll see a lot more people being able to afford a second-hand electric car, a lot more used electric cars transacting, in the next few years. So that's going to be a real feature of probably 5 years' time. You'll see a lot more people buying used electric cars than you do today, whereas the focus is much more on new vehicles. And I think in infrastructure, you will see this abundance of not only faster charging, but you'll see more of it, as in higher profile installations, more visible installations of those higher powered charging in a more ubiquitous fashion, which people will, again, give people confidence to switch. Electric vehicle drivers will use it, but petrol and diesel car drivers will see it, and they will see it and they'll know that they can actually use it and reliably switch over. So that's going to be great. And I think you will have this ability to actually start just driving without planning. At the moment, I think it's still likely that a lot of electric vehicle drivers are looking at a longer journey, maybe not the drive to the shops, of course, but a longer journey and thinking, okay, where am I going to stop to charge if I need to charge, or what charge points are on the way if I do need to charge? I think you will get to a point in 5 years, or start to getting to a point in 5 years, where a lot of people will be getting in the car and just driving. Now, whether that's the car sat nav, knowing where all the charge points are, having that live data, being able to dynamically route use those charge points without you having to pre-plan, or whether that's just that there's so much infrastructure that actually you don't need any, you can just find it as if you do today. Nobody searches on a map for petrol stations today, really. They just find one as they need it. And I think that's what we need to get to, is if we're still having to plan journeys on a map or an app, in 5-10 years time, we probably won't have succeeded as an industry.
A big thank you to Tom and BP Pulse for coming onto the podcast this week. If you enjoyed this episode and want to listen to more from the Everything EV podcast, then subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from and have a listen to all of our other guests. For daily news coverage, features and much more, you can head over to our website at evpowered.co.uk, and you can also find us on YouTube, Instagram and Twitter. That's all for this episode. Thanks once again for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Everything EV podcast.